Good afternoon. Welcome back to the garden. This is the week between Christmas and New Year's, and it's the time that I usually think about what's going into the garden next year, what worked well this year, what didn't work very well, and what I want to do again next year. So let's start with the stuff that didn't do well at all. The first thing that didn't do well was the carrots. They were nothing. I didn't get any carrots. The second thing that didn't do well was beets. So obviously we're seeing a trend here with root vegetables. Didn't do very well. Another thing that I didn't get very much of, I think I planted some bok choy and I don't know what happened to that. It never appeared. I did get quite a bit of lettuce, so I'll probably still do that. Peas are no-no for me. They were great, but I only had a small space. And again, I don't have a ton of space to grow peas. And the number of peas that I would need to produce something for the freezer, it's just too much space, and I just don't have the space to dedicate to it. So my two biggest problems this year were space issues and then sunlight issues. That seemed to be the biggest hang up with some of these crops. There just wasn't enough sunlight for some of them. So I am going to definitely eliminate carrots, radishes, beets, anything like any cole crops. They were just annihilated by the cabbage whites, and even they did get underneath my netting. Even though I had rocks and stuff laying, they just still got underneath there. It wasn't horribly bad, but then they also didn't grow as well under there. I think the sunlight just wasn't getting to them enough, even though it's meant for growing outdoors. So those are the few things that I'll probably not be focusing my attention on. And the things that did really well, of course, squash did really well. Despite the vine borers, I had an incredible infestation of vine borers this year. And you may recall me going in and digging out from the stems. I actually didn't mind that. It's one of the cool things because usually with bugs, you can't always see them. You see their damage, but it's very hard to actually find the bug and, do something about it. With the vine borers, you can go in and dig them out of the stem, and that's very cathartic. I like that. So I'm going to grow them in the same place. I know that I'll have squash vine borers again there next year, but I will be more mindful and try and get their eggs. So I'm going to every day go out and just check for eggs, squash them when I can, and then be mindful of, looking for the damage. And when I see it, I'm going to go in and dig for the vine borers and kill them that way. By far, of course, by weight, that was my largest crop. I had summer squash, winter squash, and pumpkins. And of course, they just grow bigger. So they're going to be, by weight, your largest crop. Another thing that I still want to grow next year is, so what I'm doing, I'm going to grow a salsa garden. So beyond the squash, I love salsa, and I made an incredible amount of salsa this year. So I really want to focus my efforts on that because I seem to be able to grow a few things, and some of those things are the things you find in salsa. So garlic, though, was one that I had trouble with because of the allium leaf miner. And if you remember, I had it in the squash patch. So that patch just got nailed last year this year rather, with all kinds of bugs. So I'm hoping that by growing them in these bags, I will be able to more easily net the whole mess. So I'm gonna, right before the season starts, as soon as it starts warming up, I'm gonna put the mesh over top of these, see if we can get that leaf miner under control and keep it from attacking my garlic here. So that's the first thing. Obviously I changed from growing this year, so this is hopefully we'll have a great harvest next year. This year I had to process all the garlic at once, meaning I had to actually take out all the cloves and everything and do something with it because it wouldn't store because it had been impacted by the leaf miner, which stinks. So obviously you want storage garlic, and that's what I'm going for. A lot of these are hard necks. So that's the first thing's garlic. The second thing that didn't do very well was onions, and that was my fault. I didn't trim them enough when they were in the basement, and I should have just kept them clipped. And they flopped over, so when I put them out, they'd already flopped over, so they really weren't gonna go very far anyway. But I ended up with little pearl onions, so that's not a big deal. So that one was my fault. It wasn't because something got to them. So I'm hoping that I can get that going, because obviously you need onions for salsa. And I just like onions anyway. I would love to have some good storage onions. So we are gonna try that again. I do have some beds dedicated just to see if we can get some great onion harvest. Another thing was the tomatoes. I didn't have an incredibly great tomato year. Part of it was the sunlight wasn't great. The other part was I'm terrible at staking everything, and so they just sort of flopped over and they didn't produce like they should. And the third thing with the tomatoes was the deer loved to chew them. They were hanging over the fence and the deer just came and munched off the tops, and so the indeterminate ones just stopped, producing. And this next year I'm actually going to try to build up the front of the garden fence so that they can't get to the tomatoes, and also build some good staking for them so that they'll grow up instead of over the fence. So the tomatoes were my fault just the same way as the onions, and it's because I was a lazy gardener, so it is what it is. My peppers, out of all the crops I grew, other than squash, the peppers had the most weight counted for my harvest this year. It was more than 21 pounds of peppers that I pulled out of this garden over the season, which is a lot of peppers. Mind you, I don't really grow a lot of bell peppers, and my bells usually don't get much bigger than snacking size just because they don't get enough sunlight. But man, I got some other peppers that were great. The number one producer this year was the Hungarian hot wax for me, and the pepperoncinis. But the Hungarian hot wax by far was the one that held up the best, was best in all my salsas, freezes the best. So if you want to grow a great pepper, try a Hungarian hot wax. It's very similar to a banana pepper. It's slightly spicier, but it grows very similarly and looks really similar. And for me, that was the one that did the best in this garden, so I am going to be growing a lot more Hungarian hot wax next year. I also have a couple of other ones that I'm going to try. Biquinho peppers, which are a Brazilian pepper. It's called Little Beak. And I'm also going to be doing some Scotch bonnets. Those are not for me. Those are for friends. I am going to stick with the more moderately heated peppers so that I don't burn my face off. But I do have friends that want Scotch bonnets, so I am going to attempt to grow a few for them and see what we get out of them. I've not made any promises. I said I got the seeds, but other than that, I'm not making any promises as far as what production comes out as. So that's the basic makings of salsa. Of course, I'm not going to grow lemons here. I'm in Maryland, so I don't really have a way to grow lemons. I can't bring a plant inside because I have cats and they like to pee in things. So that's not really a great thing to do with a lemon tree either. So the lemons I will be purchasing from the store. But other than that, I'll be making hopefully most of the ingredients for salsa next year. I'd also like to get into fermenting the peppers and maybe making some hot sauce, things like that. I'd love to do that as gifts, but we'll see what I get next year. You never know what your crop is going to be like. You could have a great year like this year for squash, and then next year it's a dud. Last year in 2020, I had an incredible cucumber year. This year it was a dud, complete dud. I won't be growing a lot of cucumbers this year simply because I don't have the trellis space for them if I'm going to be dedicating a lot of it to tomatoes. So I need to make my choices, and I'd much rather have tomatoes than cucumbers. So I eat way more tomatoes than I do cucumbers. And the last thing I'm going to be continue to grow, of course, is my black raspberries. Now my patch got a little out of hand this year, so I am going to have to do some pruning before the season next year. But it is going to be, I think, one of the best crops, it looks like, ever that I've ever had. So I'm really stoked about that. But I just wanted to give you all a little bit of an update and let you know what's going on in my garden. I hope your gardens are shaping up. I hope you were able to get out and do some really cool stuff in the last few days since it's been so warm. Climate change is here. And I hope that you have great plans for your gardens. And I will check back in with you as soon as I start growing things in the basement. So stay tuned for that. And with that, I'll catch you outside.